Keanu sat alone in the back of the studio hallway, hands tucked in his pockets, listening to the muffled echo of his own name from the stage outside. People were arguing about him again, his talent, his relevance, his entire worth, while he stared at the floor, letting the storm pass like distant thunder. The door was half open, and through the crack he could hear the sharp voice of a critic on the live panel. "Let us be honest," the man said, laughing. "He's overrated. Same expression, same roles. Hollywood just likes his image. Strip that away and what's left?" Laughter followed, bright and cruel. A younger actor, sitting a few chairs away from Keanu, shifted uncomfortably and glanced at him, as if expecting anger or at least a wounded reaction. But Keanu just breathed in slowly, like a man who knew the rhythm of pain by heart. He had heard variations of this all his life. Too stiff, too quiet, too lucky. People who had never met him tearing apart a version of him they had built in their own minds. A part of him, the part that remembered sleeping on friends' couches and losing people he loved without warning, wanted to walk onto that stage and tell them everything they didn't know. About grief, about starting over, about what it cost him to simply stand in front of a camera and believe in himself. But he didn't move. He just closed his eyes and let the words slide past, like knives thrown at a wall they couldn't pierce. A production assistant hurried down the hall, tablet clutched to her chest, eyes wide with the frantic energy of live TV. She stopped when she saw him. They're talking about you," she said, as if he hadn't already heard. "The segment was supposed to be about your new film, but the critic Marcus, he kinda went off. The clip is already trending. People are tearing you apart on social media right now." Her voice cracked on the last word as though it personally hurt her. She liked him. Everyone on the crew did. He always said thank you. He remembered their names. Keanu opened his eyes and met her worried gaze. "It's okay," he said softly. "Let them finish." There was no anger, no bitterness, just a worn-out gentleness, like someone who had accepted that not every wound needed a bandage, and not every insult deserved an answer. He stood up slowly, stretching his back, feeling the weight of years of judgment and expectation, and for a brief moment his calm began to fracture. What if silence was no longer strength but surrender? What if his quiet had started to look like weakness, not dignity? In the control room behind the stage, a producer argued into his headset. "This is gold. The drama is keeping people from clicking away. Don't cut it. Let Marcus talk. Ratings are spiking." Keanu stepped closer to the hallway's end, now only a few steps away from the curtain that separated him from the cameras and the world's scrutiny. He could walk out there. He could finally defend himself, tell his side, clap back with a perfectly timed speech that would go viral in minutes. He imagined, just for a heartbeat, the headline, "Keanu finally snaps back at haters." The thought tasted sour on his tongue. From inside, he heard Marcus's voice again, colder this time. "He hides behind this mysterious nice guy act. Have you ever heard him stand up for himself? No, because there's nothing there. Silence only works when you've got something real to back it up. Otherwise, it's just empty." The words hit deeper than the others, hooking into an old doubt he kept buried. Maybe, somewhere, he believed a part of it. Maybe his quiet was just a shield because he was afraid of what would happen if he truly spoke. The assistant touched his arm, voice trembling. "Do you want me to tell them you're coming on? You could respond live, clear everything up. People would love to hear you defend yourself for once." Her eyes were pleading, not for ratings, but for justice, for something fair in a world that often was. Keanu looked at the curtain, at the slice of blinding light between the fabric, and felt the gravity of 1,000 expectations pulling him forward. For the first time in a long while, his silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a choice loaded with consequences he couldn't quite see yet. He took one step toward the stage, the audience's noise swelling louder, his heart beating in his throat. And then Marcus said one more sentence. A line so personal, so unexpectedly cruel, that it froze Keanu mid-stride and made the entire hallway seem to tilt around him. Marcus's voice cut through the laughter, stripped of charm, heavy with something harsher than criticism. "You know what really bothers me?" he said. "People worship him like some kind of saint, but where was this kind and humble hero when his co-star had that breakdown on set last year? He just stood there, silent like always. Silence can be selfish, too. Sometimes it means you just don't care enough to speak." The room on the other side of the curtain went quiet, the kind of hush that meant everyone knew he'd crossed a line. The younger actor on the panel shifted forward, clearly uncomfortable. The host forced an awkward smile, trying to keep control of the show. But it was that one sentence, "Silence can be selfish." That echoed in Keanu's chest like an accusation he'd spent years trying not to hear. His foot, mid-step, hovered for a second, then slowly settled back behind him. His expression didn't change much, but inside something old and fragile stirred, a memory he usually kept locked away. He wasn't thinking about Hollywood anymore. He was back in a hospital corridor years ago, sitting in a plastic chair at 3 in the morning, elbows on his knees, fingers clasped so tightly they hurt. A doctor had just told him there was nothing more they could do. The woman he loved had slipped away without a chance for last words or dramatic goodbyes. Family members had cried, shouted, demanded answers, but he hadn't said anything. He just sat there in stunned silence, his grief too big for language. Later, someone had whispered, "He doesn't even react. Does he even feel anything?" It wasn't true, but he had never found a way to correct that story. His silence had written it for him. The studio hallway brightened as a camera light swept past the open door. Keanu blinked, snapped back into the present. The production assistant was still watching him, eyes full of concern. "They shouldn't say that about you," she murmured. "They don't know what you've done for people behind the scenes, the charity stuff, the way you help crews. Why not tell them? Let the world see the real you." Her voice trembled with a kind of urgent hope. She wanted a hero who would fight back, not just endure. Keanu thought about the stuntman whose medical bills he'd quietly covered after an accident, the stagehand whose mother needed surgery, the driver he'd sat with for an hour in a parking lot after hearing about his divorce. None of those moments had cameras. That was the point. Kindness to him was like breathing. You did it because you were alive, not because someone was watching. But now, listening to Marcus, he wondered if his refusal to speak had allowed a different story to grow in the dark. One where he was not gentle but empty, not humble but hollow. On stage, the younger actor finally spoke up, his voice tentative. "I've worked with him," he said, glancing toward the wings as if hoping Keanu couldn't hear. He's actually one of the kindest people I've met. Just because he doesn't clap back at every comment doesn't mean he's fake." His words were clumsy but sincere. The host seized on the tension. "So are you saying Marcus is wrong?" she asked, leaning in, hungry for conflict. The cameras rolled closer. Millions of eyes were watching. Marcus smiled, the fixed smile of a man who had built his brand on sharp takes and couldn't back down now. "Kind off camera, maybe," Marcus replied. "But kindness without accountability is just good PR. If he's so real, let him come out here and talk. Prove it. Say something. Otherwise, this silence screams louder than anything." He turned, staring toward the shadow where Keanu waited as if he could see through the curtain. The challenge hung in the air, electric and cruel. Somewhere in the control room, a producer whispered, "If he walks out now, the internet will explode." The assistant's grip on her tablet tightened. "You don't have to take this," she said, her voice suddenly fierce. "They're using you for views. They poke, you bleed, they get paid. You can tell your story on your own terms, or you could just walk out of here, keep your peace. Either way, doing nothing, it lets him own the narrative." The last sentence landed heavily. It was something Keanu had always tried not to think about. He had survived so much by choosing calm, by choosing to let the storm rage without joining it. But what if, this time, the storm wasn't just outside of him? What if it was starting to reshape who he was in other people's eyes? He walked away from the curtain just a few steps, then stopped in the center of the hallway, caught between the door that led outside to the quiet parking lot and the path that led to the stage lights. His pulse beat in his ears, a slow, steady thud. Somewhere his publicist was texting him nonstop, the phone in his pocket buzzing again and again. He didn't look at it. Instead, he stared at a framed black and white photo on the wall, an old image of another actor from decades past, candid and unguarded, laughing with the crew. Someone who was famous in his time and forgotten now. The thought almost made him smile. Fame was loud. Legacy, if it was real, was usually quiet. "I'm not afraid of him," Keanu said finally, more to himself than to anyone else. His voice was low, almost contemplative. "I'm afraid of becoming what he says, of letting anger decide who I am." The assistant swallowed, her eyes shining. "So what do you do," she asked, "when staying silent feels like surrender, but speaking feels like losing yourself?" The question hung between them, raw and honest, with no easy answer. From the stage, the host's voice called out, half teasing, half provoking. "Well, Keanu, if you're watching from back there, do you have anything to say?" The audience murmured, some cheering, some booing, the atmosphere turning wild and unpredictable. The cameras panned toward the wings, capturing only darkness, but filled with the expectation that at any second he might appear. Keanu closed his eyes, remembering hospital corridors and lonely apartments, long subway rides and nights when no one knew his name. He had built his life on a quiet promise to himself: never let bitterness speak louder than kindness. Never let pain become performance. But now, minutes away from a choice that could redefine him in front of millions, his hands trembled just enough to betray the war inside. He opened his eyes, took a deep breath that felt like stepping off a ledge, and began walking. Not toward the exit, not quite toward the curtain, but straight down the middle, each step heavier than the last, knowing that whichever way he turned at the end of that hallway would change how the world saw his silence forever. Keanu's footsteps echoed softly in the hallway, the distant roar of the audience swelling and fading like ocean waves behind the walls. Halfway down that narrow stretch of carpet, he stopped again, as if some invisible line cut across the floor. To the left, the red exit sign glowed above a door that led to the parking lot, the city, and a quiet ride home. To the right, the curtain framed a path into the chaos of cameras, bright lights, and a waiting confrontation. He stood between escape and exposure, feeling the weight of both. The production assistant hovered a few paces behind him now, afraid to get closer, afraid to leave. "If you walk out," she whispered, "people will say you ran away." She swallowed, then added more softly, "If you go on, they'll try to break you down until you react the way they want. It's like there's no winning." Her words landed with a tired truth he recognized. In this world, staying human often felt like losing a game you never agreed to play. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied his own reflection in a small glass window in the studio door. Dark suit, tired eyes, that familiar, unreadable expression people love to project their fantasies onto. He spoke quietly, almost as if testing the taste of his own thoughts. "When I was younger," he said, "I thought courage meant speaking louder than everyone else. Then I thought it meant walking away and not caring. Now I'm not sure what it means at all." The assistant took a shaky breath. "Maybe courage is saying something without becoming them," she suggested. "Not a clapback, just truth." Her voice cracked, and Keanu realized she wasn't just talking about him. She was talking about herself, about every person who had ever swallowed their pain to keep a job, a friendship, a fragile peace. A crew member jogged past them, earbuds in, barely noticing. The world kept moving, even as his own slowed to a crawl. Inside the studio, Marcus was still talking, his words a faint buzz through the wall now. "He made a fortune off the sad, mysterious, nice guy thing," he said with a bitter laugh. "People project their own fantasies onto him, but at some point doesn't he owe us something real? A real opinion? A real stance? Or is he just empty armor?" That last phrase sliced through the hum, empty armor. It sounded almost poetic, and that made it worse. Poison wrapped in style. Keanu's jaw tightened, and for the first time that day, anger flickered hot behind his ribs. Not the raging kind, but the deep, wounded kind that knows exactly where it hurts. Empty armor. If only they knew how many times that armor had cracked, how many nights he had spent alone after premieres, sitting on the edge of his bed, shoes still on, asking himself quietly if he had done enough with the life he'd been given. He remembered one specific night after losing someone he loved, sitting in the dark and whispering to no one, "I'm still here. I don't know why, but I'm still here." That didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like surviving. His phone buzzed again. This time he pulled it out. Dozens of messages filled the screen, but one stood out from an old friend who rarely texted unless it mattered. Saw the clip. "You don't owe anyone a performance of your pain, but don't let them rewrite who you are. Silence is power only when you choose it, not when they use it against you." He stared at those words, something inside him clicking into place. Maybe the choice wasn't between speaking and staying silent. Maybe it was between reacting to attack and responding from truth. He took a longer breath, letting it sink in. Then he turned, not to the exit, not directly to the stage, but to a side door that led into the control booth above the studio floor. The assistant blinked in surprise. "Where are you going?" she asked. "You'll miss your segment." He gave a small, almost apologetic smile. "I just want to see what this storm really looks like," he said, "before I decide whether to walk into it." There was something steady in his tone now, a quiet resolve that hadn't been there moments ago. The control room buzzed with frantic energy when he stepped inside. Screens everywhere showed different angles of the stage, Marcus leaning into his microphone, the host watching him with a mix of excitement and discomfort, the younger actor shrinking slightly in his chair. A sound engineer did a double take when he realized who had just walked in. The director, hunched over the main console, pulled off his headset in shock. "Keanu, us, sir, we're live," he stammered. "You're supposed to be in the wings. We can bring you out in 30 seconds if you want. Just say the word." Keanu moved closer to the main monitor, watching his own name flash on the bottom of the screen in bold letters. The crawl beneath it read, "Controversial take. Is Keanu too silent to be real?" The absurdity of it almost made him laugh. His existence, his pain, his entire way of being reduced to a split-second question designed to keep thumbs from scrolling away. He listened as Marcus continued, voice calm, almost surgical. "I'm not saying he's a bad person. I'm saying we've projected so much goodness onto him that we've stopped asking if he's actually earned it. When has he taken a real risk? Spoken up about anything that mattered?" The younger actor on the panel shifted forward again. He's helped a lot of people quietly," he insisted. "You don't have to broadcast goodness to make it real." Marcus shrugged. Maybe silence is just easier when you're comfortable." The host sensed the tension rising and leaned in. "So if he walked out here right now," she asked, "what would you say to him?" The entire studio seemed to hold its breath. Keanu watched himself being discussed like an empty chair. On the monitor, the camera slowly panned toward the wing where he should be standing. In the control room, everyone looked at him, waiting. The director cleared his throat. "If you go now, we bump the ad break. You'll own the moment. You can shut him down. This is history-making TV." There was a strange hunger in his voice, the hunger of someone who smelled numbers and headlines. Keanu's gaze didn't leave the screen. "Own the moment," he repeated under his breath. How many careers, how many lives had been twisted chasing that mirage? "What if I don't want to own the moment?" he murmured. "What if I just want to own myself?" No one in the cramped room quite knew how to respond to that. They were used to negotiations, not confessions. He imagined walking onto that stage, heart-pounding, words sharp and carefully shaped into something quotable. It would feel good for a second to watch Marcus's smirk falter. But what then? The clip would be spliced, edited, turned into reaction videos and think pieces. Some would praise him for finally destroying his critic. Others would say he'd lost his mystique, that his kindness had been an act all along. His pain would become everyone's content. And beneath all that noise, the real question would still be waiting. Who are you when no one is watching? The director tapped his watch. "They think you're coming," he said urgently. "We've teased it twice. If you don't show, it'll look like you're scared." Keanu finally looked away from the screen and met the man's eyes. "Maybe," he said quietly, "I'm scared of something else." His eyes softened. "I've spent most of my life trying not to turn my hurt into a weapon. If I walk out there angry, I'm not sure I can keep that promise." Down on the stage, the host smiled at the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "we've just been told that Keanu is in the building listening to everything. If he chooses to join us, we'll welcome him. If he doesn't, that silence will speak for itself." The audience reacted with a wave of anticipation, cheers, a few mocking boos. Marcus leaned back, confident, completely unaware that the man he was dissecting was watching him from above, hands calmly resting on the console. In the control room, the director leaned closer. "So," he asked, almost pleading now, "what does your silence mean today, Keanu? Are you hiding, or are you making a statement?" The air seemed to thicken around the question. On the screens, the cameras searched the edge of the curtain, hungry for an entrance. Every second stretched longer than it should. Keanu glanced one more time at the storm he could step into with a single decision. His heart was pounding, but his voice, when he finally spoke, was steady. "I think," he said slowly, "today my silence needs a shape, not a performance. A choice." He turned from the screens and headed for the door, leaving the director and crew staring after him in stunned confusion. As he walked back down the hallway, the assistant rushed to meet him, eyes wide. "So," she asked breathlessly, "are you going on? Are you going to answer him?" He paused beside her, the muffled crowd roaring again as the show went to a commercial break, one last window for him to appear. He looked at the curtain, then at the exit, feeling something inside him settle at last into place. "I'm going to answer," he said. "Just not the way they think." And with the audience counting down seconds and the host preparing to bring the show back from commercials with his name on her tongue, Keanu put his hand on a door handle that would lead him somewhere no one in that studio expected. Keanu pushed the door open and stepped into a smaller, darker space just off the main hallway, a quiet green room that hadn't been used all afternoon. The noise of the studio dulled to a distant rumble, like a storm heard through thick walls. A single standing lamp cast a warm circle of light on a worn couch and a low coffee table cluttered with half-empty cups and wrinkled script pages. It felt almost like a different world, one where no one was asking him to perform. The production assistant followed, confused. "They're coming back from commercial in less than a minute," she said, breathless. "If you're not on that stage when the cameras roll, they'll say you back down. They'll call you weak, or fake, or worse." She sounded torn, like someone who cared deeply but was afraid of the cost of principle in a world that rewarded spectacle. Keanu moved to the table, picked up a discarded notepad and a pen, and sat down slowly, as if committing to the ground beneath him. "I know," he said. His voice was calm now, the earlier tremor gone. "If I go, they'll get a performance. If I don't, they'll get a headline. Either way, they win the story unless I write my own." The assistant shook her head. "But how?" she asked. "They're live. Millions are watching. They own the cameras." Keanu looked up at her, and there was a quiet intensity in his eyes, a softness that didn't mean weakness but choice. "They own the cameras," he agreed. "But they don't own my voice or my silence." He began to write, the pen moving quickly, his handwriting uneven but firm. After a moment, he handed her the notepad. The short statement was simple, almost stark. "I've heard what's being said about me today. I don't believe every attack deserves a fight. I'd rather live my values than argue them on television. If silence makes some people doubt me, I can live with that. I answer to my own conscience and to the people I touch in real life. Not to ratings." He watched her read it, her eyes flicking across the lines. When she finished, she looked up, stunned. "You want me to post this?" she asked. "Or give it to the host?" He shook his head. "No, this isn't for them," he said. "Not first, anyway. This is for you, for the crew, for the people who have actually seen me. If they ask you where I am, tell them I chose not to turn my soul into a segment." She stared at him, swallowing hard. "They're going to be furious," she whispered. "Marcus, the network, your own team, you're walking away from the biggest moment of the show." Keanu's lips curved into a small, almost tired smile. "Maybe the biggest moments," he murmured, "are the ones no one films." From the hallway, the show's theme music swelled again. The host's voice boomed through the building, energetic but edged with tension. "Welcome back," she said. "Before the break, we were discussing our next guest, Keanu Reeves, and the question of his silence. We were told he might be joining us." She paused, clearly waiting for some signal from the control room that he was on his way. None came. In the quiet green room, Keanu stood and walked over to a wall where someone had pinned photos from past episodes. Smiling guests, crew parties, behind-the-scenes moments. Not one of those photos showed a ratings chart or a viral tweet. Only people. "I used to think the loudest room was the most important one," he said, half to himself, half to the assistant. "But the older I get, the more I realize some battles are only worth fighting if they change something real, not just a narrative." The assistant checked her earpiece, flinching at the frantic voices inside. "They're asking where you are," she said. "They want you on the stage now." Her gaze searched his face, looking for hesitation that wasn't there. "You're really not going?" she asked. "Not even to defend yourself?" He turned from the wall and met her eyes gently. "I'm defending something," he replied. "Just not my reputation." He let that settle, then added, "If I fight every person who misunderstands me, I'll spend my life inside their story. I'd rather spend it living mine." There was no bitterness in his tone, only a deep, settled clarity. The assistant's shoulders dropped, some hidden tension releasing, as if something in his decision gave her permission to hope there was a different way to exist under scrutiny. On stage, the silence had grown thick, awkward. The host glanced at the wings, then back at the camera. "Well," she said, forcing a laugh, "it seems Keanu has chosen not to join us after all. Marcus, any thoughts on that?" Marcus leaned toward his mic, ready to pounce. "Honestly," he said, "it proves my point. Real people stand up and speak. Hiding backstage is just more of the same, empty silence." A murmur rippled through the audience, some nodding, some shifting uneasily at the bluntness. Before the assistant could stop herself, she stepped closer to the door, as if she might rush out and shout the truth down from the rafters. Keanu gently touched her arm, stopping her. "You don't have to fight this battle for me," he said softly. "Or for anyone. The world doesn't need more shouting. It needs more people who know who they are when nobody claps. She took a shuddering breath, torn between anger and admiration. But it's not fair, she blurted. They're painting you as a coward in front of millions. He nodded slowly. Fairness is a nice dream, he said, but my peace doesn't come from their approval. It comes from the life I live when the cameras are off. His words weren't grand or rehearsed. They landed like simple facts, steady and grounded. In the control room, the director scrambled to salvage the moment, cutting between Marcus's commentary and reaction shots of the audience. Social media feeds on the side monitors began to flood with the hashtag "Where is Keanu?", the conversation splintering into mockery, curiosity, defense. Everyone had an opinion about his absence. No one knew his choice had already been made somewhere quiet, a floor below, far from their noise. Back in the green room, the assistant looked again at the note in her hand, then at him. "Can I share this?" she asked tentatively. "Not with them on stage, with others, people who care, people who might need to hear it." For the first time that night, a real warmth touched his features. "If you think it will help someone," he said, "share it, not as a statement, as a reminder for anyone who thinks they're less because they don't fight every insult with a louder insult." She nodded, wiping quickly at her eyes. She didn't want to cry in front of him, but something about his refusal to play the game felt like a small crack of light in a room she'd thought was permanently dark. She snapped a photo of the note, then hesitated. "They're still talking about you," she said quietly. "They're saying your silence means you're guilty of something." He tilted his head, considering. "People will always write stories about strangers," he replied. "Most of the time, those stories say more about them than about the person they're judging." He slipped his hands into his pockets, the movement unhurried. "My job isn't to fix their imagination. My job is to live in a way that, if someone really meets me one day, they'll feel the truth more than they remember the rumors." A knock sounded at the door, sharp and insistent. His publicist stepped in, expression tight with anxiety. "They're furious," she said, not bothering with greetings. "The network, the producer, everybody. You walked away from a moment that could have shut Marcus down, rebranded you, boosted the film. They're asking what your strategy is." Strategy. The word hit the room like a piece of cold metal. Keanu glanced at the assistant, then back at his publicist. "My strategy," he said softly, "is to stay human." The publicist sighed, somewhere between exasperated and resigned. "That's not how this works," she said. "In this business, if you don't control the conversation, someone else will use it against you." He nodded, understanding her fear even if he didn't share it. "Maybe they will," he answered. "Maybe for a while the story will be that I hid, that I was afraid, that I'm empty armor. But stories change, people forget. What stays is how I treated the people around me, the crews, the drivers, the ones who see me when no one's recording." His gaze softened as he said it, as if he were thinking of all the quiet rooms and late-night sets and shared coffees that had shaped his real life more than any headline ever could. The publicist looked at him for a long moment, something in her posture slowly unclenching. "You know this will hurt the film, right?" she asked finally, but there was less edge in her tone now, more genuine concern. "Maybe," he said, "but if a film's success depends on me turning bitterness into a show, then maybe that's a cost I'm willing to pay." The words landed with a quiet finality that even she couldn't quite argue with. As the show rolled on without him, footage of the segment began to spread online, but so did something else. The assistant, against her usual cautious nature, posted a photo of the handwritten note with a simple caption. "He chose not to fight on TV. He chose peace instead. Believe what you want about him. I've seen how he treats people when nobody's watching." No names, no tags, just a small act of witnessing. Within hours, people began sharing it. Survivors of bullying, young artists afraid to speak online, ordinary workers tired of being dragged into public conflicts at the expense of their mental health. The words hit a nerve not because they were flashy, but because they were. "I'd rather live my values than argue them on television," quietly moved through feeds crowded with outrage and hot takes, like a calm voice in a crowded room. Back in the dim green room, long after the cameras shut off and the crew began to pack up cables, Keanu slipped on his jacket and headed toward the back exit. The assistant walked with him, the hallway now almost empty, the earlier chaos reduced to a few distant clatters and fading echoes. The air outside the door smelled like rain on concrete, cool and grounding. She hesitated at the threshold. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Does it ever get easier, being misunderstood like that and still choosing not to fight? He thought for a moment, watching a thin drizzle start to fall beneath the streetlights. No, he said honestly, it doesn't get easier, but you get stronger at knowing which battles are worth your soul. He glanced at her, a small smile touching his mouth. And you learn that not every accusation deserves a reply. Sometimes silence isn't about weakness. It's about protecting the part of you that still believes in kindness. She nodded slowly, as if storing those words somewhere deep inside she could reach for later on worse days. Thank you, she murmured. Not for the note, for choosing to be who you say you are, even when no one's forcing you. He looked almost embarrassed by the compliment, as if he didn't quite know what to do with it. Take care of yourself, he said, stepping out into the soft rain. This world will try to turn your heart into content. Don't let them. The door closed gently behind him, leaving the assistant standing in the quiet hall, the faint scent of rain filtering through the cracks. She held the fading notepad paper in her hand like a small, fragile vow. Outside, under the streetlights, Keanu walked alone, the city's noise distant and muted. Some people somewhere were already arguing about him, calling him weak, calling him wise, dissecting his motives, projecting their own fears and hopes onto his calm. He let their voices swirl in the far distance, like wind he had no need to chase. His steps were unhurried. He had no speech to polish, no viral clip to replay, no rehearsed victory to savor. What he had instead was something quieter and far more enduring. The steady, unshaken knowledge that he had not allowed anger to turn his heart into a weapon, that he had chosen dignity over spectacle, that his silence, this time, was not an empty retreat, but a deliberate boundary drawn around the kind of man he refused to stop being. And though he didn't know it yet, somewhere in 1,000 dimly lit rooms around the world, people were reading his words, breathing a little easier, and thinking to themselves in their own quiet lives, maybe I don't have to shout to be strong. Maybe walking away with my integrity is its own kind of victory. In that untelevised, unedited space between accusation and reaction, the true power of his silence finally revealed itself, not as surrender, not as emptiness, but as a quiet, stubborn act of courage that no critic, no segment, and no headline could ever truly own.